My name is Daniel, and if I had to describe myself in one sentence, I would say this: I am the one who always stands in the background. Not loud, not outstanding, not the kind of person who walks into a room and makes every eye turn in his direction. I just exist there, quietly, ordinarily, unnoticed. I have been like that since I was a child. I was not the kid who talked a lot, who fought for attention or tried to prove himself. When I grew up and started working, I kept that same habit. I did my part, did my job properly, did not complain, did not try to attract attention. I believed that if I worked hard long enough, one day people would see my value. But in the workplace, things do not operate that simply. In my company, people praised those who spoke loudly, who walked confidently, who always knew how to stand out. They were not necessarily better, but they were more visible. They were heard, recognized, mentioned in meetings. And me, I was not. I was the one people easily forgot. The one who, when I spoke up in a meeting, could not even make anyone bother to turn their head. The one whose ideas only got noticed when they were repeated in someone else's voice. No one deliberately treated me badly. No one insulted me or tried to hurt me. But they did something even more uncomfortable. They acted as if I did not exist. And sometimes that silence hurts more than any words. At my company, people had a very particular way of measuring someone's worth. It did not depend on how much you actually did, how much you contributed, or how many things you quietly carried on your shoulders that no one ever saw. There, value was measured by how loud you were. The ones who got the most attention were not the most capable, but the ones who talked the most. They walked into the office radiating confidence, their voices booming, their steps firm and assertive. They told stories, laughed loudly, clapped each other on the shoulder in the hallway, called out colleagues' names across the room as if they were on a stage. Every meeting felt like a performance. Whoever spoke louder, that person won. And management loved those people. They were the standout talents, the natural leaders, the names that always appeared in the end-of-month praise emails, in the list of high-potential employees at private lunches with the boss, and me. What about me? I sat at my familiar desk in the corner, quietly finishing my tasks. I fixed bugs in the system without anyone knowing who caused them. I stayed late to make sure projects would run smoothly the next day. I helped new colleagues understand the process, guiding them step by step with patience. But all of that happened in silence. No applause, no thank you, no look of recognition, only a feeling, as if all my efforts were dissolving into thin air. When evaluation time came, I hoped my name would at least be mentioned. But then my manager always looked at me with a polite smile, the kind of smile reserved for someone useful but not noteworthy. "Daniel, you are very reliable," he said. "But the company needs people with influence." Influence, a phrase that sounded both unfamiliar and bitter. I understood what they meant. They were not saying I did not do enough. They were saying I was not loud enough. There were times I sat in a meeting and slowly put forward an idea. No one reacted. No one responded. No one bothered to write it down. But just a few minutes later, someone else repeated the exact same idea in a louder, more confident voice, and the whole room nodded in agreement. That moment felt like a thin cut across my chest, not deep enough for anyone to see, but gradually accumulating over time. I started to realize a truth. In this place, people do not listen to what you say, they listen to who says it. And in such a noisy world, quiet people like me are easily left behind. There are pains in life that do not come from direct insults, but from small moments that repeat over and over, slowly wearing you down like tiny cuts on the skin, not bleeding, but seeping into you from the inside. For me, every day at the company was filled with moments like that. I remember a time when our whole team was working on an important project. I was the one who directly analyzed the data, designed the solution, and checked every detail before deployment. But when it was time to present the work, the person who stood in front of the room to report was a colleague, the one who spoke fluently, confidently, and knew how to draw all eyes to himself. When the meeting ended, all the compliments, all the handshakes, all the great job remarks were for him. No one mentioned me. No one knew that behind that presentation were weeks of my quiet, diligent work. I just sat there, giving a slight smile as if it did not matter. But as I walked out of the meeting room, my steps felt heavier. I felt like a little more of me had disappeared. Another time, I proposed an idea to improve a process, something that could save time on handling tasks. When I spoke, the room went silent. But not because they were thinking. It was because no one cared. The meeting continued as if my words had never existed. A week later, that same idea came up again, this time spoken by a different colleague. People discussed it excitedly, praised it as a great idea, said it should be implemented immediately. I did not say anything. I just sat there, my hand quietly tightening under the table. And I suddenly understood sometimes the issue is not whether an idea has value, but who is the one saying it. Then there were the lunch breaks when the whole group made plans to go eat together. They would discuss it animatedly right in front of me, but no one thought to ask, "Daniel, are you coming?" It was not because they hated me, they just forgot I was there. I stayed behind in the office eating a quick lunch at my desk. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioner humming. Sometimes I would look at my reflection in the glass in front of me and see a man sitting there, hard-working, silent, and lonely. I was not angry at them. I did not blame anyone. I just kept asking myself, is the problem me? Am I not good enough? Or is it just that I do not know how to speak up? Those questions followed me every night. I went home, turned off the lights, lay there staring at the ceiling for a long time. The feeling did not explode into rage or despair. It just lingered, a kind of nameless exhaustion. I started to doubt my own worth. I wondered, if one day I disappeared from the company, would anyone notice, or would everything continue to function as if I had never been there? There were times I thought about quitting, but every morning I still got up, still went to the office, still did my job, as if that were the only thing I knew how to do. I was not looking for praise. I just wanted to be seen. Just once, to be heard. I did not know that one day, all that silence, all that endurance, all those hidden cuts would lead me to a moment that changed everything. It all started with a new project, an automation system that upper management believed would take the company to the next level. They described it with big, flashy words: optimization, breakthrough, strategic leap. In meetings, everyone seemed excited, as if all we had to do was press the deploy button and everything would magically improve. But me, I only felt unease. I was the one directly testing the system. Every line of code, every background process, every data structure, I looked through them all. And the more I read, the more I tested, the more I realized something was wrong. There were incomplete chunks of code. Many features were unfinished. Some failure points lay deep inside, like tiny cracks in a foundation that people deliberately ignored just because the surface still looked fine. I prepared a detailed report. Not vague comments, but actual numbers, screenshots, test procedures, and results. I wrote everything with the greatest care, because I knew if this system failed after going live, the consequences would not just be a small technical issue to fix. It could affect customers. It could affect data. It could affect finances. It could affect the company's reputation. I sent the email to management, to the technical team, and to the project owner. Then I waited for a response. 1 hour, 2 hours, an entire afternoon. No one replied. The next day, I brought it up directly in a meeting. But after a few hesitant sentences from me, the conversation quickly moved on to something else. They said they needed progress, needed to stick to the timeline, needed to launch as planned. No one wanted to hear about risk. Perhaps in their eyes, I was just someone who worried too much, too cautious, too quiet for my voice to carry any weight. In the end, the system was still pushed into production. People congratulated one another. Praise started appearing in internal emails. They talked about achievements, about a big step forward. I sat in the corner of the room, staring at my screen, feeling worry seep into every breath. I did not want to be right. I wanted all of it to be in my head. I wanted to believe everything would be fine. But deep down, I knew that when people deliberately step over a warning, the price to pay is only a matter of time. Monday morning began like any other, calm, orderly, like a familiar machine humming along. White light from the ceiling fixtures fell over the rows of desks, computers booted up, and the tapping of keyboards filled the air like the office's breathing. No one knew that just a few hours later, everything would slide out of control. Around 9, the system started showing small errors. A few processes ran slower than usual, then some transaction requests got stuck. At first, everyone assumed it was just a minor glitch, a small technical hiccup that would resolve itself. But within minutes, those tiny errors spread like cracks racing across a sheet of glass. Dashboards flipped to red. Reports stopped updating. Orders were caught halfway. Customers could not access their accounts. Phones started ringing non-stop. Voices overlapped, the customer service staff trying to calm callers, managers shouting to one another in panic, hurried footsteps pounding up and down the hallway. The office, which had been as calm as a still lake, suddenly turned into a storm. Leadership rushed to give orders. The same people who always spoke loudly in meetings now showed visible confusion. They ran from team to team, issuing urgent commands, demanding reports and solutions, but no one truly knew where to start. With every passing minute, the number of blocked transactions climbed. Every small error combined into one massive mess. I sat in front of my monitor, watching data flicker across the screen. All the warnings I had sent before were now playing out one by one in front of my eyes. But I did not feel any satisfaction about being right. Instead, my chest felt heavier and heavier. I understood exactly what was happening, and I also knew that if no one intervened properly, things would get much worse very quickly. In the middle of all that chaos, no one noticed me. No one called my name. No one asked for my opinion. But it no longer mattered. This time, I was not waiting for anyone to acknowledge me. I quietly stood up, sat down at my workstation, opened the core system, and started tracing the failures. Lines of code flooded the screen like a complicated maze. I followed the installation sequence backward, identified the clogged processing flows, checked again the scripts I had flagged earlier. In my mind, pieces began fitting together. Everything I had been afraid of was now real. The noise in the office faded into a distant buzz. I no longer heard the rush of footsteps, no longer heard the arguments. I only heard my own breathing, slow and heavy, mixed with the steady sound of the keys under my fingers. Time passed without me noticing. 1 hour, then 2, then 5. People began to burn out. Some teams had already stopped, no longer knowing what to do. But I kept going. I separated workflows, restored modules, rebuilt the processing pipeline from the ground up. Evening fell. The office gradually emptied. Lights went out over rows of empty desks. I was still there. I did not need anyone to look at me. I did not need anyone to give me credit. I only needed the system to come back to life. Around 3 a.m, I finished the final queue. I took a deep breath, then pressed enter. Metrics lit up again. Data began to flow. Orders were released. Accounts were restored. The system ran as if it had never crashed. The entire room was silent. No cheers. No words of thanks. Only the glow of the screen reflected on my tired face. The company had been saved. But at that moment, I was the only one who knew it. When the clock was close to 3 in the morning and the system was finally stable again, I sat there for a while longer, my hand still resting on the keyboard. I did not shout. I did not let out a long sigh of relief. I just quietly watched the lines of data running smoothly again, like the heartbeat of a body that had just been rescued. The whole office was swallowed by darkness, with only a few faint lights in the corners. Empty chairs were scattered around, half-finished coffee cups and papers left on desks, traces of a day of chaos. Yet, in that moment, in the place that had been so loud and hectic, everything felt strangely still. I stood up and walked slowly down the long aisle. The floor was cold. The hallway stretched ahead, my footsteps echoing in the silence. A feeling of relief mixed with emptiness crept into my chest. No one was there to witness it. No one knew what had just happened. No one knew I had stayed that late. I grabbed my coat and left the building. Outside, the night sky was quiet, cold wind drifting through empty streets. The city was asleep, and I just walked out of a silent battle that no one else had seen. On the way home, I was not thinking about having done something great. Instead, I asked myself, if the system had never crashed, would anyone remember that I had once issued a warning? If I had not stayed that night, would anyone realize what had been lost? Perhaps the answer was no. I got home when dawn was close. The room was quiet, streetlights shining through the window and laying a dim patch of light on the floor. I put my things down, too exhausted to think any further. I only managed to sit on the edge of the bed, and then collapsed from fatigue. Sleep came slowly, heavy, like something weighing me down. My body ached, but my mind kept replaying images of the system, the lines of code, the ignored warnings. It felt like I had saved something, but lost a part of myself in the process. The next morning, I returned to the office with dark circles under my eyes and a body that ached in every joint. The atmosphere was different. There was no chaos, no emergency calls. Everything was working normally again, as if the storm had never passed through. No one mentioned the previous night. No one asked who had fixed it. No one talked about how close things had come to falling apart. People sat down, turned on their computers and resumed their work, like a loop repeating itself. I quietly sat at my desk, opened a new file, and tried to continue as usual. My mind was heavy, but inside I felt strangely empty. I was not expecting applause. I was not waiting for praise. But at the very least, I had thought someone would say thank you. Yet no one did. And in that moment, I realized something deeper than ever before. It was not that they were intentionally denying what I had done. It was that to them, I had never truly existed. The work was running again. The system was functioning. Everything was considered fine. And the person who saved it all was simply an invisible piece of the background. I sat there, my hands on the keyboard, the light from the screen illuminating my tired face. A slow question formed in my mind. If everything I do happens in silence, then where does my value really lie? I did not know that only a few hours later, that question would finally be answered, and my life would turn in a different direction. That morning, I stepped into the office with a body weighed down by lack of sleep and a mind still half stuck in the long night before. The harsh white from the ceiling lights beat down, cold and sharp, making it feel like everything around me was too bright, except for me, washed out and gray. Everyone had resumed their normal routine. Screens lit up, the sound of typing filled the room. Small conversations buzzed here and there like nothing had happened. Anyone walking in at that moment would never have guessed that only hours earlier, this place had been on the edge of chaos. I sat down, opened my documents, and tried to work like usual. But that emptiness was still there, as if all the effort I had poured into the night before existed only as a faint shadow no one could see. Then something began to change. At first, it was just stray glances. Some colleagues walked past my desk and their eyes lingered slightly longer than usual. They did not say anything, but their expressions showed curiosity and confusion. Soon after, I saw my manager walking quickly down the row of desks, searching for someone with his eyes, then stopping when he saw me. "Danielle, can you come to the meeting room for a moment?" he said, his voice noticeably different. I stood up and followed him. As the door closed behind us, I immediately sensed that the atmosphere inside was unlike a normal meeting. In the room were the head of department, the vice president, and the CEO. I froze for a second. My heart pounded. For a moment, I thought I was about to be reprimanded for stepping outside of process or for accessing the core system without permission. I tightened my hands slightly, took a deep breath, and braced myself for the worst. Then the CEO looked straight at me, not cold, not distant. His gaze was sincere and heavy with thought. He spoke slowly. "Daniel, we reviewed all the system logs. The room was completely silent. Every trace, every operation, every overnight session, they were all yours." No one said another word. I stood there not knowing how to react. I felt something strange, a mix of trembling and a lump rising in my throat. Then he asked, "Why did you stay until almost 3 in the morning? Why did you not tell anyone you could fix the entire system?" Every eye in the room turned toward me. For the first time in all my years at the company, everyone was truly listening to me. I swallowed. A long silence passed. Then I answered, slowly, clearly, without shaking, because up until now, no one has believed that I could. No one argued, no one denied it, no one made excuses. They just stayed quiet. But this time, it was not the careless silence of before. It was the silence of realization, of regret, of shame in the face of the truth. The director lowered his head slightly. My manager looked away, his eyes red with guilt. The CEO let out a sigh. "We were wrong," he said softly. "We did not see you. We did not judge you correctly." He paused, then continued. "It is not that you were not good enough. It is that you were too quiet." That sentence felt like a blade, but it did not hurt in the way you might expect. It was not cruel. It was simply brutally honest. Quiet, but not useless, not insignificant, not small. That morning was not just the moment when they finally saw me. It was also the moment when I began to see myself again. After that meeting, I walked out with a strange feeling, not joy, not exactly relief, but as if some invisible door had opened after being shut for many years. I did not cry. I did not laugh. I did not explode with emotion like characters do in inspirational movies. I just stood in the hallway for a while, watching the light from the windows spill across the tiles, feeling my heartbeat slowly return to normal. For the first time, I did not feel like a shadow. No longer the person in the back. No longer just a silent presence. No longer the name that was always missing from recognition lists. That day, I was seen. But more importantly, I began to see myself. That afternoon, the company held an all-hands meeting. They talked about the system incident, about lessons learned, about processes that needed to be reviewed. I sat in the back row as usual, but this time it felt completely different. There were no indifferent glances sliding past me. No more absent-minded nods thrown in my direction as I walked into the room. Instead, some people looked at me and held that gaze a little longer. Someone greeted me with a sincere nod. Someone else smiled quietly when our eyes met. A few colleagues came up to me after the meeting. One said, "I did not know you did that much." Another sighed, "If we had listened to you earlier, things might have been very different." And someone simply placed a hand gently on my shoulder without saying a word, and that touch alone was enough for me to understand. It was not praise that moved me. It was recognition. What I had been waiting for was not glory, but the feeling that I truly existed in this place. In the days that followed, things started to change. Not in loud or dramatic ways, but quietly and steadily, like the slow spread of dawn across the horizon. In meetings, when I began to speak, people no longer brushed past my words. They put down their pens, stopped typing, and looked toward me. Not because they feared my authority, but because they had learned to respect the value of a quiet voice that still had something worth listening to. I realized I did not need to become loud. I did not need to change who I was to be like them. I did not have to chase some ideal mold the company once had in mind. I only needed to become a stronger version of myself. I began to speak more clearly, not louder, but more certain. Not to assert my ego, but to protect the work and what I knew was right. I no longer backed away when there was disagreement. I no longer shrank when someone tried to talk over me. I did not have to shout to be heard, I just had to stand my ground in my calm. And strangely enough, that calm made my voice more powerful than ever. One afternoon, the CEO called me to his office. Not to give me an award, not to praise me in front of everyone. He simply said a few straightforward things. Daniel, from now on, we want you involved in technical decision-making. Not because of what happened, but because it should have been that way a long time ago. He paused and looked straight at me. You are not just good at your craft. You have something many people do not: patience, meticulousness, and a deep sense of responsibility. I did not know what to say. I just nodded slightly, but inside something was put back where it belonged. It was not the feeling of being elevated. It was the feeling, I am finally standing where I was meant to stand. That evening, as I stepped out of the office building, I stopped in front of the glass doors and looked at my reflection. It was still the same person, still the quiet, slightly thin man who did not talk much. But his eyes were different. No longer lost, no longer doubting himself. I realized that all those years, what hurt me the most was not that others did not see me. It was that I had started to believe I was truly small. The moment they acknowledged me was not just when they changed their view of me. It was when I changed how I saw myself. That day did not turn me into a completely different person. It only helped me understand this. I was never truly invisible. I had just been living in a world that was too loud, a world where quiet people like me take a very long time to finally be heard. And when that moment comes, I understand that the most precious thing is not other people's recognition. It is regaining my own belief in my worth. Looking back, I see that life does not always credit the ones who work silently. Some people walk into a room and immediately draw every eye. Others, like me, have to walk a very long road just to prove they have always been there. But eventually I learned something. A person's value does not depend on how loud they are. It depends on whether, when everything collapses, they have the strength to stand firm. I once thought I was small. I once thought silence meant weakness. I once believed only the loudest voices mattered. But I was wrong. There are people who do not need to talk much because they let their actions speak. And sometimes those quiet people are the ones holding the world together. I do not need to become someone else. I do not need to learn how to scream to be heard. I only need to trust my true worth, and to know that no matter how soft my voice is, one day it will reach the ones who need to hear it. That moment does not arrive by luck. It comes when you have been quietly patient long enough, resilient enough, steady enough to walk through every indifferent glance. Then one day, when the world suddenly calms down, people will realize that the quiet one was the person who stood strong from beginning to end. And more importantly, you will realize it too. If you see yourself in this story, if there has ever been a time you felt overlooked, dismissed, or treated as if you did not exist, remember that you are not alone. Keep being patient. Keep doing what is right. Keep believing that your value does not depend on whether others see it. Your moment will come, and when it does, all the silence you have carried will no longer be meaningless. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories for the quiet, steady, deep-feeling ones, you can stay with me and follow the next stories. Not rushed, not loud, just stories told with all the sincerity I have.